Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is Cade, joined by Andrew. And first off, we just want to say happy spooky season. We're excited to have a whole bunch of new videos for you guys. And to kick this off, we are starting with our review of Friday the 13th Part 2 from 1981. Andrew, for a franchise that has as many sequels as this does, what's your relationship with this movie specifically? Because there are some people who consider this movie to be better than the original from 1980. And is that something you've ever felt before?
Honestly, I find them both to be incredibly mediocre. When we, way back in the day, when we did our review of the original Friday the 13th, I think I put it as people looked at that movie through rose-tinted glasses when it's really not that great of a horror movie on its own. And I see the same kind of opinion about this. People think it's a solid horror movie when it's really not. But we'll get to that in a minute. We do have some pros to talk about.
Yeah, and I think I've always considered it a decent follow-up to the original film. I've never considered it to be one of the best horror sequels ever made, admittedly, and we'll talk about why later, like you said. But yeah, after my most recent rewatch of this movie and prep for our review, there were some things I found that I actually do like better than the original film. And to start off our pros, the first thing I want to highlight this movie for is the introduction of Jason Voorhees, because I will give this movie credit for bringing Jason to life. You know, this is the movie where he finally took over the franchise as the signature killer, even though he's not the killer in some of these movies, specifically the first one and Part 5, A New Beginning, but we'll talk about that at some point down the road. And for this movie to introduce Jason, I think it makes sense for him to be the next killer after Pamela's death. And while I do have my issues with this version of Jason, overall, I think he is an effective slasher in this movie for the most part.
Yeah, this movie is historic because Jason Voorhees makes his big debut in this as the main killer, and I think we'll agree he is definitely on the Mount Rushmore of horror movie characters. You can say whoever fits into the fourth spot is up for debate, but the big three is Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, and Jason Voorhees for a reason. So just on that note, this is a historic movie, but historic doesn't always mean good. Though I do need to highlight, I actually kind of like Jason's just sort of woods hillbilly look in this one, as opposed to the zombie he becomes much later on in the series.
Yeah, I can see what you mean by that. And interestingly enough, Andrew, the screenwriter of the original Friday the 13th, Victor Miller, and even Pamela Voorhees' actress, Betsy Palmer, apparently they were both against the idea of Jason becoming the killer. Miller actually hated the idea because his intention for Jason was for the character to be a victim rather than a villain, and in his mind, the sequels really misinterpreted that. Meanwhile, with Betsy Palmer, apparently she was never convinced that this was actually the killer. She felt that Jason died and that this killer, who we see throughout the rest of the series, is actually just someone entirely different.
Now that is an interesting theory. I never actually heard that thought process before. Do I believe it? Not necessarily, but it's definitely an interesting avenue they could have gone. Like, oh, maybe this isn't Jason. Maybe this is somebody else. Also, I just want to give a shout out to Jason's costume in this movie, in particular, his mask. Now, obviously, he does not get the iconic hockey mask until the third one, but actually really like the sort of a burlap sack look he's got going on here because it's actually paying homage to, according to the director, the Texarkana Moonlight Killer, who was a serial killer in the, if I remember correctly, the late 60s, who targeted couples on lovers' lanes around Texarkana, Texas, and who wore a pillowcase with high holes cut out of it. So the fact that they drew inspiration from a real killer for this on-screen killer, I thought was an inspired choice.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And I think another pro that I want to highlight with this movie is always going to be the setting of Crystal Lake. You know, I think that's going to be a pro with most of these movies. You know, not exactly for Jason Takes Manhattan, but that's
We will get to that.
yeah, we'll get to that eventually. But with Camp Crystal Lake in this movie, I like how we have a different campsite with all these different counselors and training. And again, sure, a campsite is a setting that has been used in many horror stories, but it's usually a welcome one for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a good setting because it's isolated, but it's not like overly cramped, like say a spaceship or, a haunted house or something. It's still got some room to breathe.
Yeah, and I think the atmosphere really adds to it because overall, I think the cinematography adds to the movie along with the sound design. And there's also a section of the movie where it's raining, just like in the first one, and that's always a great way to add to the atmosphere. And like I said, I do like that we get a different area near Camp Crystal Lake instead of it just being the exact same one that we saw in the first movie.
Yeah, at this point in the series, it hadn't been done to death yet, so it still felt fresh. So I have a pro I need to bring up. Now, outside of Jason Voorhees and then later on in the franchise, Tommy Jarvis, there's not a lot of beloved human characters in this franchise. I mean, it's kind of in my opinion, like the peak of the dumb teenagers get killed in the woods kind of trope. But I actually really liked the final girl in this. I liked Ginny as a character because I think she's got a unique edge as opposed to other final girls. Now, do I think she's in the upper echelons of, Laurie Strode, Sidney Prescott? got Nancy Thompson, no. But I do like, she's doe-eyed and sweet, and she cares about the people around her. And I also really like that they gave her the background of a child psychologist. She tries to get into Jason's head a little bit. Think about, did he see his mother die? Would he, he wouldn't really know anything about the difference between right and wrong. That's an interesting way of looking at it. And I also really like the climax of this movie where she uses those skills to try to impersonate Pamela Voorhees and talk Jason down. And it works until she makes the mistake of moving out of the way and Jason can see his mother's head on the altar he's made for her. It's a nice change of pace for a horror movie climax where the final girl is not just trying to beat the villain, but actually try to outsmart the villain.
Yeah, and I honestly like her a lot better than Alice from the first movie because, yeah, like I mentioned in our review, Alice to me is probably one of the weakest final girls in slasher movies and horror films in general. And I think Ginny is definitely a big step up from that. I think she has more of a personality, and I think she's a lot smarter because I think Alice made just a little too many dumb decisions in the original. So, yeah, Ginny, I think, was a good addition. And yeah, I like that she holds her own against Jason. And like you said, she doesn't always make stupid decisions. She's able to use her brain a lot, which is really nice. Yeah, I do think she's definitely one of the better protagonists in this franchise.
Another pro I need to bring up is this is a series with a lot of really great, memorable kills. But in my opinion, this movie has maybe my favorite in the franchise. And I am talking about Mark's kill when he's sitting on the porch in his wheelchair, and then just out of nowhere, a full machete is just buried in his face. The effects look great. He sells it really well. It's this kind of almost like twitching body response. And then just the visual of his wheelchair just thunking down the entirety of the staircase with the rain falling on it. It's just a great visual. I love that kill, which is saying something because the rest of the kills in this movie kind of suck. It's a lot more off-screen stabbings.
Yeah, but I do get what you mean. And honestly, but apart from that kill, Mark's kill, the other standout kill for me is probably the double kill where we see Sandra and Jeff get killed by Jason when he just impales both of them with the spear. That's probably the other signature kill that comes with this movie. And yeah, I think it's up there. It might not be the best kill in the film, but I think it's definitely a standout.
Yeah, the double stab with the spear is good. I would like it more if it was more on screen as opposed to just showing the reaction shot and then the shot of the spear going through the bottom of the bed with the blood spurt.
Well, and keep in mind, Andrew, with this movie, we didn't really have Tom Savini.
That is a good point.
I think that if he did come back for this one, maybe the kills would probably stand out a little bit more. But apart from the kills, another thing I want to highlight about this movie as a pro is some of the other characters. Now, not all of them are standouts, but one person I do want to talk about is Paul, the head counselor of the training program. I like how, he's obviously the oldest counselor there, and while you see him taking his job really seriously, he still tries to be a member of the group and, try to just have fun and hang out with all the trainees and just be a regular guy there. And overall, I thought his chemistry with Jenny was fine. I like how he was there to help her fight Jason at the end. And, he didn't really overpower Jason at any point, but he was still willing to fight back. So, yeah, he might not be one of the best characters in the franchise, but I think he's definitely one of the better characters in this movie.
I would agree. And that actually kind of leans more into one of the cons I have. So shall we shift more into what we didn't like about this movie?
Yeah, might as well. Do you want to start?
Yeah, let me start off with my biggest issue with this movie. Oh my God, the runtime of this movie is padded ridiculously. There are so many shots of this movie that last way too long. Did we really need multiple extended scenes of people just walking/running back and forth through the woods with no climax? Did we need an extended shot of a dog walking through the woods? Did we need an extended shot of one of the camp counselors staring at a lake before she decides if she wants to skinny dip or not? It's so padded out. And this movie is only 87 minutes long. It's not even 90 minutes long. If you cut out some of these, it's probably only a 70-minute movie.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean. And getting into some of my cons of this movie, I want to get into the plot. And the first thing I want to talk about with the plot of this movie, and yes, this is probably unfair on my part because this is the case with a lot of slasher franchises, but I think a big problem with this movie is that it's really just the same movie as the first one. A bunch of counselors show up at this camp, they hang out a little bit, a killer shows up, and all things go to hell when he starts killing everybody, and then you have one final person left to take him on. Well, I get it's the signature formula of the franchise. I wish they could have done something a little bit more different instead of just new people and new area at Camp Crystal Lake with a new killer.
Yeah, it really is just the same movie, but with Jason as the actual killer this time. I don't know what they could have done at this point in the franchise to maybe differentiate it it a little bit because, and we'll get to the later entries when they tried to do the something different, it did not go well at all.
But also, this movie expands the mythology of what happened to Jason when he drowned, and we find out, hey, he might have actually survived and he was just living in the woods near Crystal Lake the whole time. And we also learn that he witnessed his mother's death and that he'll now just kill anyone who comes into his territory. Here's my question with that, and this is something I've always wondered, even when I was a kid and I first saw these movies. So, where exactly was Jason during the first movie? Just knowing in this movie now that he's been around this whole time and that he witnessed what happened to Pamela, it's just, you think that maybe at some point he would have approached her or something and just let her know that he was alive, maybe before the events of the first film or even during the events of the first film. So I wish we could have gotten more of a clear answer as to why Jason chose to just stay out in the woods instead of maybe letting his mother know in some way that he was still alive.
Well, to quote one of your classic lines, Cade, because the movie has to happen.
Yes, fair enough. I get it.
Another thing, much like the first movie, this is a bunch of nothing characters. Again, outside of Jason and to a lesser extent Ginny and Paul, not a single one of these characters sticks out to me in any way, to the point that I had to look up people's names on the cast list to make sure I was talking about the right person.
I do agree with you, but I will say that I think these characters are a little bit more entertaining than the ones that we had in the first movie. And I think a big part of that is because I think their interactions are a little bit more enjoyable. But yeah, other than that, every character is pretty bland and one-dimensional, and it's pretty easy to forget their names.
I honestly gotta even disagree if they're even more entertaining. They're just a bunch of dumb, horny teenagers.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Actually, another thing that I'm unfortunately going to disagree with you on, I've actually never loved Jason's look in this movie, to be completely honest. Maybe it's because I'm just so used to the signature hockey mask version of Jason, but I've actually just never really loved the bag that Jason wears on his head. I've never found it really that scary or memorable. To me, it's just always been a little goofy. I wish it was a little dirtier. I wish it had tears in it and everything. They kind of do that in the remake from 2009, but the conversation for another video. I can see why people do like it. It's just never really worked for me personally.
Okay, and I can see where you're coming from, but again, we disagree on that one because I loved the Baghead.
I understand, and I got nothing wrong with that. But my last con that I want to bring up with this movie is the ending, which includes, just one final jump scare. This is a pet peeve that I have with pretty much most horror films in general. It's not just the Friday the 13th franchise, but when Jason pops through the window to grab Jenny, and then we transition to later when Jenny's getting taken away in the ambulance. Again, it's something that I've never liked because I don't like when movies just throw in one final scare just for the sake of having it. I think you can just end the movie. And also, I don't like that we never get a clarification for what happened to Paul. We just see him and Jenny there when Muffin comes in. Jason pops out, grabs her. We transition to what happens to her later. We see her getting taken away. We get no indication of what happened to Paul. I mean, sure, we can just assume that Jason probably got him or something, but I wish we just got more of a clear ending than that.
Yeah, it feels like they kind of ran out of budget when they got to the ending and just sort of shot something that kind of fits as a conclusion to the story. But I agree. It feels like there's like 20 seconds of film missing here. And yes, I know the irony of me complaining about something being cut out of this movie after I spent a good few minutes moaning about how padded out this movie is.
All right, well, with that, why don't we move on to our score for this movie? Andrew, what would you like to give Friday the 13th Part 2?
Well, it's not a great movie in my opinion. It's historic, much like the first one, but it's not good. So for me, not good, but not outright atrocious, means it's a 5.
I mean, I like it just a little bit better than the first movie. I always kind of have. Again, not one of the better slasher films or sequels. Not bad, not necessarily very good. So instead of a 5, I'll probably give it a 5.5 out of 10. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening to our review. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you all again next time.